Sara Friedlander. I'm a specialist in post-war and contemporary art at Christie's, and I am here at Luminance 2012. I love photography because I love the world, and photography is the very best way to see the world, manipulated and otherwise.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sara. Hi. I work at Christie's, and I sell art. And I'm here to talk to you as a merchant today, which kind of makes me sound like I peddle fish on the Lower East Side. But I'm very happy to be here and to talk in sort of two parts. The first is going to be about how photography, specifically fine art photography, entered the contemporary art market, the sort of evolution of that, and also what actually creates value in a photograph in today's contemporary art market. As a young art historian, photography was the sort of evil stepchild of fine art and never actually recognized in any of my classes as an art form in and of itself. And I think that that really reflects the sort of highfalutin, highbrow, purist vision of where American art was in the 20th century. If a camera can make art, so can a can opener. This was a very common belief of the purist painters who were slashing paint on wall, Jackson Pollock, Robert Rauschenberg, Mark Rothko, and really sort of photography wasn't art. This is one of my favorite slides from the 20th century of any image. This is John Baldessari supervising the burning of his paintings and baking them into cookies in 1970, which really signaled a big change. For so long, people weren't looking at photography as art, and painting was so important, and yet here is this guy who started to burn his paintings. And what began to happen was American art began to change, and artists were engaging with new media like the camera, like the video, performance art, conceptual art, declaring painting dead. John Baldessari was also a teacher at Cal Arts and was responsible for raising a generation of artists, which would become to known as the pictures generation, who were not photographers. They were artists who were using the camera as a means to an end. Of course, I wouldn't be doing my job as a salesperson if I didn't talk about why this is important in the market and the institutions that came to represent and support these artists to start to begin to talk about this creation of value in a photograph. And this is a slide of Metro Pictures, which opened its doors in the mid-1980s to support works by artists like Cindy Sherman, who I'm going to talk about a little bit later, Louise Lawler, who is an artist who actually mounts her photographs on museum boxes so that they have a very sort of three-dimensional look to them. And of course, Richard Prince, who is a very important photographer, and this is actually a photograph of an advertisement. So again, all of these artists are using photography, using the camera, but Cindy Sherman is never considered a photographer, really considered a performance artist. Louise Lawler and Richard Prince, who has never been included in any photography show at MoMA. And actually the photographs department at MoMA will not take any of his work in fact. No conversation about the art market today would be complete without Larry Gagosian looking good in this photo, actually. And what happened after Metro Pictures was that it sort of became the norm for photographs to enter into the gallery sphere alongside paintings. And Gagosian, like so many things, is brilliant at doing this. He represents people like Andreas Gursky, a live photographer making art today, who we're going to talk about in depth later, next to Claude Monet, and people like Tomas Truth, who's another important German photographer, next to people like John Curran. And Gagosian doing this really sort of brought in a new generation of collectors who maybe couldn't afford the $3 million price tag on the Curran, but could afford the sort of $50,000 price tag on the Tomas Truth, and really sort of began to blur these lines. David Zwirner is another gallerist who's very successfully been able to do this. And I should say also that Gagosian and Zwirner both have very international marketplaces. So this is really something that's has tremendous global presence. So here you have Philip de Lorca Corsha, a living photographer, and next to Alice Neal, a portrait painter who's been dead for 30 years. And I mention Zwirner because he was very important. He was one of the first gallerists, traditionally fine art gallerists, to enter into the photo fair that happens at the Armory every year. And this was a huge watershed moment because it really, again, began to blur these lines of painting and photography and art and really brought them together in the marketplace. I should add here that this photo fair that happens at the Armory generally shows classical and vintage photography like Bresson and Cortege and Steichen. And so for Zwirner to be in this fair, with price tags that were much higher than that classical photography was a very big deal. And speaking of classical photography, this very poor image is a photo of Edward Steichen's Pond Moonlight from 1904. This is the third highest price for a photograph ever sold at auction, just under $3 million. At Sotheby's in 2006. And I bring up this photograph as we sort of move away from the history and start to talk about today's current market for photography and what creates value. So uniqueness is a very important thing. This is actually from an edition of 3, 2 of which are in the Metropolitan Museum. This is one of those, and one of which is in MoMA. And Steichen was the first photographer in the early 20th century to really play with light. His manual application of light-sensitive gums really altered this image and made it very painterly, which accounts for the price point. Provenance is another very important thing. Provenance, size, scale, and uniqueness. So this is Barbara Kruger's untitled work from the 80s. Kruger, again, a very political-based artist. These are sort of 3 photo collages with text over it. Very large in scale, just under 140 inches, that sold for $900,000 from the collection of Peter Norton of the Norton antivirus. So again, the provenance, the scale, the uniqueness, these are huge factors that create value in contemporary photography. Jeff Wall, I was talking before about Richard Prince not being in the photographs department at MoMA. When I first saw the Jeff Wall exhibition at MoMA about, 10 years ago or something, I went on the website and he was listed as a photographer. And I went on the site last night just to sort of play around and see that his status has been elevated to artist. So I think that's sort of interesting. Wall's one of the most important Canadian installation artists who again, we're talking about artists who are using photography as a means to an end. He meticulously sets up these scenes. They're printed on transparencies and then laid into light boxes. So again, they have this very 3-dimensional quality to them, almost sculptural. This is from this is an image that depicts the Afghan-Soviet War in 1986. This is from Robert Pincus's collection. In the same sale, we sold Pincus's Rothko for $80 million. So again, with this provenance coming from this amazing collection, this price went up to $3.6 million, which was a world record for the artist. Hype and institutional support are huge factors that affect the value of contemporary art. I could not be speaking about the contemporary art market if I didn't speak about hype. And this Cindy Sherman is a good example. I spoke about Sherman earlier as one of the pictures generations. Cindy has always been a very commercially successful artist and has been with Metro Pictures since the 80s. And again, she is a performance artist. She works alone in her studio, carefully staging scenes in which she's able to explore issues of femininity and age. And this is one of her centerfolds from 1981, after she abandoned the black and white film stills that she was doing in the 70s and 80s and started getting big and colorful. And what happened with this work, which up until recently was the world record price at $3.8 million, is that in May of 2011, it was announced that she would be having a major retrospective at MoMA. And the Museum of Modern Art in New York was an amazing forum for Cindy to show all of her work. And so at an estimate of $1.5 to $2 million, the market responded, and the work sold for $3.8 million. Whoops, can you go back one slide? So this is actually not my inability to use technology, but a different slide of the same image, another from the edition of 10. So this is May 2012. What happens? The show at MoMA comes up, and everyone dumps their Cindy Shermans onto the market. And the market was just completely oversaturated and flooded by a variety of works by the artist. Some good, some not so good. And this really led to a major price decrease. So at an estimate of 2.8 to 3.8, this work ended up selling for almost $1 million less at $2.8 million. Same edition, different edition number, but equally amazing provenance. This was coming from the Akron Art Museum. So wonderful condition, great provenance, but different moment in the market. The general contemporary art market is another very crucial factor that affects the value of contemporary art photography. And this is an example of Tomas Truth. In November 2007, we could sell anything. The market was alive and well. And this really beautiful photograph, this artist is represented by Marion Goodman Gallery, sold for just over $1 million at an estimate of 5 to 7. Flip forward to a different moment in the market, February 2009, that date is wrong, where things did not feel so good. Lehman had just crashed and people were scared. And photography did not feel like a good, safe place for people to put their money. Instead, people were buying works by Alexander Calder and works by Andy Warhol. And I want to spend just a few minutes talking about Warhol because despite these advances in the current value for contemporary photography in today's market, photography is still substantially lagging behind paintings. This is Andy Warhol's Green Car Crash, which Christie sold in 2007 for over $70 million, world record price for the artist at the time. And I've paired this next to Warhol's top record price for a photograph, which is a unique Polaroid of himself that sold for just over $250,000. And this is interesting because the painting is actually a silk screen, and Warhol did multiple images of not this exact work, but of the Death and Disaster series, lots of different car crashes using the same screen, while this Polaroid is completely unique and can never be reproduced again. So that's just sort of something to think about, going sort of back to the purest vision that painting will always be more valuable than photography. This is true, of course, for contemporary artists like Richard Prince, whose nurse painting sold for $8.4 million, and whose photograph of a cowboy sold for $2.8 million. Again, so just showing that painting, even that has screened images, that is a unique work, versus this photograph that is an edition of 3 is substantially higher in value. So where does this leave us? This leaves us today with the world record price for a photograph, which I'm very honored to say Christie's set just last November in 2011. The estimate was $2.5 to $3.5 million, and it sold just over $4 million. And this was a huge moment. Again, the second highest price for a photograph was the Cindy Sherman at 3.8. And actually, out of the top 20 prices for photographs ever at auction, 8 of those are by the sort of quote-unquote contemporary fine art photographers. So why is this $4 million? Well, a lot of those reasons are what I've just been speaking about. The hype and the strength in the market. Gursky's represented by Larry Gagosian. Major retrospectives on the horizon and that have already happened. It is very large in scale, 151 inches long, and came from an amazing collection. Condition was beautiful, and this image was incredibly iconic for the artist. When we think about the images in classical photography that are important, the pictures of Ansel Adams and the sort of Paris scenes of Versailles, these images are extremely important in what makes something valuable, sort of obviously. And this depiction of the Rhine that ran through Gursky's hometown in Dusseldorf was incredibly important for the artist, very iconic for image making. So all of these factors together resulted in this price, and hopefully in 5 years we'll double it, and I'll be up here again talking about some of those things as well. Thank you. Oh wait, I have one more slide. Can you go back? I forgot my last slide. It's the most important one. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's start with the Gursky.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that he used digital manipulation to take things out of the scene, and I've heard that that's true for artists like Richard Misrak as well. Is there any concern on the part of the art world about digital manipulation as far as art photography is concerned?
No, in fact, I think we encourage it. What's amazing about Gursky is he's called the painter's photographer, because all of the technical things he does, from digital manipulation to scanning to the printing process to face mounting the work on plexiglass to a specific frame, really makes it more like a painting than just the simple capturing of an image. So I think that process is one thing that really informs the difference between a sort of commercial photographer and a sort of art photographer.
You mentioned provenance as being a very important component of it. I can't help to also see in a lot of the art photographers that pedigree seems to be a factor in it. There seems to obviously be a whole slew of people coming out of the Yale MFA program, the Gregory Crewdson set, et cetera. Do you see, to be successful in the art world, you kind of need that pedigree nowadays, or you see a lot of emerging artists that don't necessarily have that?
I think it's both. I mean, I think who you study under is important. I mentioned Baldessari as a teacher at CalArts, who was really raising a generation of artists using photography. The Beschers in Germany, Bernd and Hilla Bescher in the 70s were teaching this sort of what we call the Struth ski school, Gursky, Struth, and Ruth, and the most important German photographers. So I think certainly who you study under matters, but there are amazingly successful artists today, both commercially and sort of curatorially, that have not had sort of highbrow educations.
And lastly, I think I read an article, and I can't remember what state it was in, but there was maybe a lawsuit or concern on the part of the artists that in subsequent sales of their images at auction, that they should be entitled to a percentage of the sale price. And maybe that was in California.
Yes.
And so when a Cindy Sherman, when she initially sells it for a few thousand, but then it's subsequently sold for $3 million, what's the discussion internally about something like that? Is it unrealistic?
Well, no, it's not unrealistic. I mean, the California resale right is now under appeal after it was first rejected. But in Paris, in Europe, they do it. And when you sell it at any auction house in Europe, there's the droit de suite, which entitles a portion of the sales to go towards the artist or the family, their estate. I think it's an interesting question. I mean, I have a sort of utopian view of the art world that when something sells at auction, it helps its primary prices as well. So the sale of the Cindy Sherman for $3.8 million had a huge influence on her primary prices from the galleries and from the secondary market. So I think it certainly helps the career. And look, I mean, I love artists. I believe they should make money. So I think this will continue to change and develop over time. Although I also love clients and things that they want to sell, and telling them that a percentage of their sales is going to go towards the artist. I have a feeling that it's possible that the auction house will have to maybe take some of that money too.
Sara Friedlander, thank you.
Thanks.